Welcome to part 2 of the adventure mechanics discussion of Subnautica. I'm Chandler.
I'm Devin.
And I'm Tom.
What were we talking about? The experience of the game. And how they made movement
right.
so enjoyable.
Yes, and I was going to say that. And once you, upgrade your fins, so, you swim really, really fast and gracefully, when you go out on land or, into the alien bases where there is no water, you just kind of plod along, and it's,
It feels
It's
awkward.
just, you feel terrible. It's awkward and slow and it just...
Oh yeah, you feel super limited when you're on land. You're like, ugh, take me back into the water.
But I think that's great, because it shows, you're kind of adapting to being in the water, and, that difference, if you do a lot of swimming, I love swimming, I like being in the water, but, when you've been swimming for, over an hour, and then you're like, okay, I guess it's time to go back to the hotel room or whatever, and you get out of the pool, and you're just like, fuck, gravity!
Right?
Everything's the worst, and you just kind of plod along, welcome back.
Yeah, even after you've explored the whole map, it's just a joy to ride around on your little ski-doo, or the underwater torpedo that you hold on to.
Oh yeah.
I couldn't
The
help...
sea glide.
Yeah. I couldn't help but call it a ski-doo. It doesn't matter what the actual title was. It was a ski-doo to me the whole time.
Okay, how many of you did the whole jumping out of the water like a dolphin thing for an extended period of time?
Every
All
time
the
I
time.
went into my moon pool.
All the time.
Every
with
time.
the sea glide, with the sea moth.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep. Whee!
And every time you'd hit something on land, you're like, oh god, I have to walk. This is horrible. They really did make walking and running in this game painful. And I'm not sure whether it was intentional or not, but the effect is
I don't think
very,
it was.
Stunning, because you would just, start walking around on land. You're like, oh my god, walking is a pain. Why can't I just be back in the water?
Yeah. I think it's that emulates real life. If you like swimming and you swim, because I do, and I used to swim a lot, and you'd get out of the water when it's okay, you've been swimming for over an hour, you gotta go home or whatever, and you'd get out and it'd just be gravity weighing on you, walking is
heavy.
a chore. And it's just I just want to go back in the water where everything's fine and not difficult, and I don't feel like I'm 1,000,000 pounds.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
Under the sea.
I genuinely don't think that they tried at that. I think that that's actually a natural effect of how good the game is at making you feel immersed in the water, because actually moving along the land is more freeing than most games are. Or more gives you more freedom than most games would, because you can walk up ridiculously steep slopes that most games would be no.
So
This works.
Yeah, and you can sprint just like any other game you've ever played.
Oh, nice Skyrim reference.
Right. But yeah, you can sprint like most other games, and you can sprint relatively quickly. It's just, I think that the game makes you feel so free, and does such a good job of giving that impression that when you're on land you feel limited, but it's not intentional.
Yeah.
The game's not doing it. You are.
Yeah.
It's a natural thing.
Well, I think it's the two things working together. It's your perception, but also the way that the game is built.
That's why
Yes.
I didn't really build a base, because I was like, oh, I'm going to have to walk in that thing. This is terrible.
Yeah, especially if you build a big sprawling base.
Yeah, no.
I redesigned.
I unintentionally did, and it's oh, I need to go all the way over to my bioreactor, but crap, I've got to go through a zigzag of corridors to get there because I didn't plan this very well.
I spent, maybe this is why I have so many hours going nowhere in the game. I spent hours designing my base to be incredibly ergonomic. So mine is where you enter the base splits off immediately in multiple directions, and everything is organized. So I have a storage room in one direction, and a bedroom in another direction, and the scanner room in another direction, and then an observatory in another direction, and it's all really localized. So it was really easy to move around in.
I wonder why you never finished the fucking story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Goodness.
I had a really nice. Well, see, and again, this for me. It was part of the immersion because I'm sitting here like thinking, oh, I live on this planet now. I honestly didn't know
I'm gonna
there was
die
any
on this
way off.
planet. I'm infected. There's no way I'm going home. So
Yeah.
I might as well make myself comfortable. As
I'm
I
not.
die.
Yes, that's exactly where my brain was. I'm like, well, there's no fucking way. The people that came to save me are already dead. No one else is coming.
I mean, you're not wrong. You just had to build a rocket to get off of it and disinfect yourself.
Right. So I was like,
Okay.
I didn't know that you could get off the planet because the last time I'd played the game, it was in beta still, and that was not an option. So I was like, well, I'm just going to make a base that's really cozy because I'm going to be here a while, and I'm going to be at this base a lot. And to be fair,
You were.
I was.
Yeah. No,
So
that brings up an interesting question, though. Like, if you had one of the non-infected peepers and, like, you had it jab the sample thing, had it jab an uninfected peeper, do you think you would have been able to get off despite being infected? Because I feel like that would be one thing that would be an obvious like trick to do to the machine. Obviously, it's not in the game as is because
Right.
you can't like hit the button with a peeper, which would be kind of funny. But yeah, that's not a thing.
right.
So would that be a thing in like if this were real? Like, I feel like that would be an obvious like problem.
So, well, okay. So we're moving into some like a lot of speculation.
Sorry, just a random thought.
That no, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of information we don't have. Like for example, about the precursors. And the fact that they did quarantine this planet, they did institute this where nobody gets on the planet, nobody gets off the planet. Like, nobody leaves, nobody comes until we figure this out because it was so bad. And there's kind of an idea that the precursors, like, they were all in agreement about this. And certainly the ones on this planet seem to be in agreement because they were all working on this project. And I'm wondering, this is the part of the information that we don't know about the precursors and how they planned this, did they plan for that? Does the reader thing, does that look for certain genetic markers, and how might it do that, especially since, our genetic markers, human genetic markers, like, are very different in many ways from a lot of other living creatures. Like, how different would we be from precursors? How would this thing differentiate? Would it know something dead from something alive?
I think it would, and the only reason I say that is if you think back to the part where it stabs you, it seems to exhibit a certain amount of intelligence.
Like
so
it looks at
I don't
you
think it would
first.
be fooled.
Yeah, it does.
It does look at
seem
you,
to
yeah.
look at you. Yeah.
It kind of checks you out. So yeah, I think that probably
The
wouldn't work.
precursors had been to Earth as well.
Had?
Yes, that's some lore that you get in their final base. Is that there are some artifacts that are from Earth / resemble things from Earth, which implies that the precursors had been there a long time ago, like way in the ancient past.
like ancient
Wow.
Assyrian swords, old.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
cool.
Mongolian, like it's like Mongolian stuff, which is kind of awesome.
That is super cool.
Which is interesting since the Degassi is a Mongolian ship, according to the lore. It's interesting. Anyway,
True.
so like they clearly had knowledge of humans, at least in ancient antiquity, our ancient antiquity. It's hard to say since we don't ever see these beings. We don't know, how they built their stuff. I mean, they clearly built a lot of it to be self-sustaining. They also can store their consciousnesses. There's a cache you can find in the crater. I think it's in the crater where there's like the 3 big ghost leviathans that spawn when you go there, because the game hates you.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
you have to go way, way, way deep down. But there's a cache there where you can find some goodies. But you also find that they can store their consciousnesses when they die. Like one of the precursors there died, but they stored that individual's consciousness. To later be resurrected? ?
Interesting.
Codified.
Can you wake it up?
I do.
No, you can't wake it up. I don't think you just know that it's there.
You're like,
if I remember correctly.
I got this consciousness thing. Yeah, that's about it.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah,
I did not get to
it's
that
like they
point.
were clearly like incredibly technologically advanced. That they
Oh, yeah.
had they could go between galaxies, kind of like the humans at the time that this game is taking place. Humans have been able to do that as well. They can travel between solar systems and galaxies. But it's pretty clear that the precursors had like a vast empire, and that it was basically, it's implied that they were basically eradicated by this bacterial infection.
Yep.
Yeah, and basically right at the brink of discovering the cure as well. So humans can't really be proud of curing it because, yeah, we really didn't.
Nope.
No, well,
They did.
oh, that takes me in question directions that I want to
Well,
I want to go.
Well, obviously they did a very good job with the thrill of the unknown, because we've spent a good amount of time talking about the unknown and theoreticals, right? So I would say that we probably should leave these questions unasked and unanswered, because that's part of the fun of Subnautica. And I believe that their second entry, Below Zero, does talk about a few of those things. So they kind of
Yes.
do address that. So yeah, I'm just going to like kind of chop that off and say, hey, there's more to this, and it's very interesting, and the thrill of the unknown is glorious in this game.
It's pretty
Yeah.
great.
And the world building is very, very, very compelling to make it so that you feel like that matters.
Yeah, because the world doesn't
Yeah.
revolve around you.
Right. Yeah.
Which is the direction I want my question to go. I want to pose
Okay.
a question to you two. And we don't really have the time to go into it in any depth, and I'm not like posing it to like blindside anyone, but something to think about, but also I'm interested to hear your like at least first impression thoughts to this. So
Sure.
preface. Folding Ideas, Dan Olson put out a video a while ago about colonialism in Minecraft and about the inherent colonialist ideas that happen and are emergent in and kind of like undergird the survival exploration genre video games. Whether or not that's intended like that, like by the developers, like it's a thing that's there. So with this game, which is an exploration survival game, with Subnautica, how do you feel about, even though the game itself, you are not the center of this world, like you're just kind of incidental in it, even though you have a first-person narrative. How do you feel about the bits and pieces that do come across quite colonialist, like building a base beyond just surviving? I'm on an alien world, I need to survive. Building a base, going around, running over wildlife, taking eggs out of the wild, putting them in a containment, and just watching them swim around.
What are you talking
even
about?
looking
Those
at
fish, they were already dead and run over by a sea moth when I got here. Sorry, I had to say that. That was the only thing that came across, and you're like, running over wildlife.
But yeah, like all that's going around and doing the things, seeing what the precursors had done, because their enterprise was incredibly colonialist as well. Not just in their past with this vast empire of colonized worlds, but specifically coming to this planet, quarantining it, and then I don't have the word. What's the word I want? Just like, plundering
Purloining.
this world.
Yeah,
Plundering the world for resources to try and solve their personal problem. A problem that they brought to this world that was, ignorant of it until and then they started stealing the eggs of these leviathans. They
captured and stole one. Yeah.
they captured and enslaved a sentient sapient being. I mean, there's a lot there that's kind of, I feel when you kind of dig into it, it kind of makes you think.
Oh, I agree.
What, as you as a player in this fictional world, like, are you doing anything different from the precursors? Like, when you leave all of your crap behind. I mean, of course, the ships got shot down, but all of that is there. You are irradiating the ocean, and the explosion of the Aurora would cause basically a mass extinction if you allow it to go off. And I believe that it will go off, at least at one time. It actually would blow up and be endgame if you didn't actually go and repair the ship.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know if that's in final release, but I think I read somewhere
don't
that had been an earlier build.
I don't think that's happening in final release, because there is part of the mission is to basically seal the reactor back up, which
Yeah, it does tell you to do that. Yeah, it does tell you to do that. But I didn't know if like you could ignore, like, because it's been a while, but I thought I had read somewhere that if you ignored it long enough, that it actually would go critical and would be endgame if you didn't actually do it. But that could have been an earlier build I was reading about. I don't know, because I usually go fix it. Because I personally am like, I don't feel comfortable with the fact that this thing is irradiating this ocean.
That's fair.
Right.
And not just because I'm in it and I don't want to be irradiated. It's like
Yeah.
I feel bad for all of these fish that we brought this problem to them. Like, they're these beings that already survived, at least 1,000 years ago, a huge mass extinction because of another colonialist enterprise. So that's my question about how do you feel about that? How does it make you feel? Do you have any thoughts?
So I think that's a very good question. I would love to dedicate a whole other podcast just to my thoughts on the philosophical issues of it, because that's scratching a huge itch.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's a huge
And
question.
I do want to talk about that a little bit more in depth. But my first impression is, just to kind of give a cursory glance at it, is most of the questions you brought up are problems in the survival crafting genre, which is colonialism versus the world. Like, it happens in Minecraft. It happens in 7 Days to Die. It happens in Rust. Rust is a slightly different problem, mostly because the colonialism is other players.
Right.
Yeah, that's a whole different issue. But yeah, those are definitely good questions to ask, especially considering the genre itself. I don't think Subnautica is unique in having those problems. And I feel like it is lessened in this because of the unknown. You're not necessarily mastering the unknown in Subnautica. Because, yes, you can kill things, but they didn't make it fun or engaging to do so. So you kind of give up, like, after your first attempt, unless you are really dedicated to it.
Oh, I keep killing things the whole way through, but I need to eat.
Okay, well, I mean, like, you don't kill for the challenge.
I mean, like, killing things for sport, or just like,
Right.
oh, this Leviathan is here and it's inconvenient, so I'm going to shoot it with my stasis rifle and I'm going to drill it with my prawn suit until it dies. Like, not that kind of, like, killing things. Like, just
Well, and actually,
because
that
you
was
can or you want to.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the things I was going to say about it. Is I feel like this game does a really good job in a very subtle way of throwing that colonialism in your face. It's the only game I've ever played where you kind of feel guilty for doing that kind of stuff, and it's also the only game I've ever played where you do feel sort of at once a part of this world, in the regard that you kind of have to, like, become an entity in this world and to survive in it, and you're, like, using the natural resources to stay alive, while also feeling like you're intruding. I don't know. I think it makes you think, where a lot of other games,
Yeah.
they
well,
do the exact opposite.
Where I think where I think the game, intentionally or not, but where I think it's really asking that question about, colonialism and that sort of thing, and conquering, and that sort of, like, human-centric or, precursor civilization-centric sort of thing, is when you find the Sea Emperor Leviathan, and she says that she's been down there for a long time, and the ones who came before, who are no longer there, that they couldn't hear her.
Yeah.
But you have that information from earlier on in the game, from earlier bases, where there's the supposition that, at least on some level, the precursors were telepathic. They probably communicated in some sort of telepathic fashion, some sort of psionic fashion. When the Sea Emperor says that, and you have this other knowledge, I feel like the tension there is, could they not hear her? Or did they willfully ignore her?
Or did
they say she's not worth listening to? She's a beast. She can't reason. Like, is that some of the reason? And of course the game doesn't answer this. Like, this is just a question that I feel is there,
Yeah.
I don't
an
know. I
interesting
can't
one.
say for certain if the developers meant to ask that question with that.
Oh, they absolutely
but I think it's
did.
interesting that it's there.
They-
oh, okay. You think
They
so?
absolutely did.
That's not
because
just
they
okay.
do have the. Sorry to interrupt. They do have the lore of the precursors, knowing that the Sea Emperor is the solution, but not all Sea Emperors, because they do catch other Sea Emperors and they're shown dead. And through the dialogue of the Leviathan, when you talk with her, she will actually say that they wouldn't listen, or they couldn't. She couldn't communicate with them. So it was kind of a tension in her dialogue itself that says they captured her. She refused to help them, and the communication broke down.
Huh.
Because that is part of her dialogue, if you listen very carefully.
Well, you basically just said what I just said.
Yeah, well, I'm like there's
Right, you're elaborating on it a little bit, but yeah, you just kind of said that. But what I'm meaning is that I don't want to, without having talked to the developers, I don't want to say that the developers intended directly authorial intent for that question to be asked. It's definitely there, but what my statement was more of this is authorial intent as opposed to this is emergent from the writing as we are perceiving it now that it's out in the wild, as it were.
I would love to kind of dig into this a little bit more and
because I think it would be really interesting if they did intend that the tensions in the Sea Emperor's dialogue with what you learn about the precursors as you go, I think it would be really interesting if that was directly intended, but I don't know that that's the case. So that's why I was kind of tempering that with, I'm saying this is here, but I don't know if it was intended by the authors.
That's fair.
Developers.
What would you to say to doing a lore like exploration of this? Like we just kind of split this up into our impressions of the game itself, and then we talk.
Yeah, I would be super down for a lore chat and discussion. I think that would be awesome. Because I think there's a lot here to talk about.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I don't want to like chop this off, but like it is like 10:30.
No, it's getting late. Yeah, and I know I opened a can of worms knowing it was late, but I just wanted to like hear your impressions on that.
So, and I actually had one more thought, just to bring it back to the colonialism thing real quick. One thing that I noticed that was starkly different, and we've talked about this before, was the fact, like what you were saying, Chandler, where you can't kill things. I mean, you can kill like little stuff for survival. You can eat, but you can't kill the leviathans. I guess theoretically you probably could, but
you can, but it's time consuming and difficult.
It's monotonous and intentionally not rewarding.
Impractical.
Yeah, it's not rewarding and it's not fun.
Like
and it's totally impractical.
Anything larger than survival, like eating fish, anything larger than that, you don't get any resources from. Period.
Right. Yeah. And that changes things, I think, because I think what I noticed, and this is something I don't think I've ever noticed in any game until this one, when in most games you come across something like a Leviathan in this game, where it's an obstacle, it's something that is impeding your ability to play the game easily because there's this thing that is attacking you and basically acting as a roadblock that makes your life hard. The human reaction, and this is, I think, in many ways telling of how people work, is eliminate the roadblock. Make it go away. And that's only for my own personal convenience. And this game, by eliminating any kind of weapon that is super effective, takes that ability away from you. And in a way, forces you to live in the environment as... This is why I think I got that feeling of like, I'm part of the environment, is when you stop treating predators as an inconvenience that should be eliminated, and instead you're like, I have to like respect that thing's territory and try to not get in its way and get killed. Yeah, you start to become part of the environment instead of being an overlord of the environment. And this game makes you confront that, which
Yeah.
I have never experienced. I don't even know if I've ever experienced that in my life until this game, where you're just kind of like, oh, huh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When something gets in our way, we just kill it. That's the automatic reaction.
which is a very colonialist outlook.
Yep.
It's not
Yep.
convenient to me. I'm getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that this game doesn't do is it doesn't present these predators in this environment as evil.
No.
No, it does not.
There's no narrative around like this thing is out to kill you. It's evil. It's going to, it's like, yeah, it might try to chase you out of its territory. It might try to bite you. It might try to eat you.
Yeah,
but
maybe
it's
hungry.
not evil. This is something that's natural in this environment, and I think that's also very refreshing, because a lot of other games will present things similar. It's like, oh, this thing, it's evil, it's bad, it's, on that same side of
And-
I need to conquer this. I am the good. I am the
Well,
light.
that was
Right.
That was the interesting part about the speedrun, was the speedrunner. So there was a speedrunner who did this at AGDQ 2020, for context. He kept calling these stalkers doggos because
Yep.
they were animals that he needed something from, but he couldn't take with force. So
Yeah.
a good portion of his speedrun is that just sitting there waiting for them to drop teeth, which is
Yeah.
Yep.
fascinating from a developer standpoint, because the speedrunner themselves became quite fond of these animals that would attack him if he was too aggressive with trying to get them to drop their teeth by picking up these metal pieces of scrap.
Yeah.
So I do think the game has that in spades. Sorry, Tom.
And the other thing that's really interesting about this game, and this just occurred to me, that is different from other games that I've played, is in almost all other games, the quote-unquote bad guy, the predators, the things that hurt you, go after you with, like, blind rage. Like, if you get within range of any of those creatures, they just instantly attack you.
Yep, they're
With
you-
prejudice.
they're aggro.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you... Right.
Yeah.
You don't get that in this game. You can actually swim right next to a Reaper Leviathan, and they will ignore you sometimes.
Yeah, and then you're just like sitting
Yep.
there trying to scan them with your little scan gun, and you're like, "Hey, don't get too far away now. I need to keep scanning you."
I need to
Yep.
scan you. Yep.
Exactly, and it's like the doggos, the stalkers. You can just totally swim alongside them, and sometimes they'll ignore you for like 5 minutes straight. They'll just be
Oh,
sitting
yeah.
there playing with their metal, having a good time,
Yeah.
and then at some
Yeah.
point they kind of go, you've been here too long, which is.
Yep. You're too
Very-
close to the metal I want to pick up, so I'm going to chase you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very. They behave much more like animals than they do bad guys, which totally changes the way the game is played.
and that's a very intentional choice from the designers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For context, they did a interview with Ars Technica about a postmortem. They call it War Stories. And
Yeah.
the lead designer explicitly said, we did not want the creatures in this game to be viewed as monsters. So that's kind of unfair for me to call the Leviathans monsters, but I didn't want to say Leviathan at the time. But
well, and they're fucking terrifying.
yeah,
So it is,
and that's by
Yeah.
design. But they're not malicious.
they're not evil.
Yeah, they're not evil.
Yeah.
They're just there.
They're
And they-
terrifying in the same way that like going on a hike and coming across a
Right.
live cougar would be terrifying. The cougar isn't
Right.
evil.
Yeah, no,
It
Right,
also
well-
doesn't mean that you're not scared shitless.
exactly.
Yeah, well, also with the way that the game is, especially with the Leviathans, like the Reaper Leviathan and the Ghost Leviathan, that are somewhat fairly aggressive, is it's more scary and more quote unquote monstrous when like you can hear them, you can see them
Yeah.
in the distance, you know that these things are predator types or something. They look like they're big predators. They look like they want to hurt you, and you can hear their like shrieking. Like the Ghost Leviathan especially has this like horrifying shriek when
Yep.
it like wants to attack, and like that's almost more like that's where they're monsters, is where you're not familiar with them, you only catch a glimpse of them, you can hear the sound, and it's like, oh no. But then once you've seen it, or once you've been attacked by one, or once you've sat in your Cyclops silently with no lights, watching the Ghost Leviathan circle a few times before it swims away, it's just, oh well, that's not a monster. It's big, but it's not a monster. I mean, some people get really scared of the reefbacks because the reefbacks make that big, loud, whale-like groaning noise.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy.
And it's like, and they're kind of creepy if you don't know what it is and you don't know where that sound's coming from. And especially if you're swimming through that area in the dark and you don't really know what's happening. Like, that can be really scary until you realize, oh, it's these things. They're making this noise and they're not. They're just here. They're just swimming around.
Yeah, like
they're my friends now.
And that's kind of very clever because they're typically the first Leviathan that you will come across. It's a non-violent one.
Yeah.
Yep, it's non-violent and it sounds big, and our brains tend to be a little bit cued to like big, loud sounds, like means big thing, danger. So it's a nice play on that like instinctual, like, ooh, that sounds big, that must be dangerous.
Yeah, and that's very clever to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do a lot of very subtle priming of the player. Like a lot of people are afraid of what's underneath. If you're on top, you cannot see into the water.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like this game does something that no other game I've ever played has ever managed. And it's kind of hard to define. I mean, it's like you can listen to this entire podcast and kind of hear it. But like, it's not one thing that it does that is different from any other game. This is a totally unique experience. I think that's probably why it's one of my favorite games ever. And it's all of this stuff. It plays fundamentally differently than anything else I've ever played.
So I agree with you completely. There was a article that I watched about this. I don't know what else to call a YouTube video. It's an article. It's talking about it.
Video essay?
Yeah, video essay that I watched about this. That basically distinguished between horror and terror. And kind of said Subnautica uses terror. I think this was Adam Millard Talks Games or something. I'll credit it. He was basically talking about how Subnautica uses terror and not horror, because horror is the lizard brain fight or flight, and terror is the unknown and the exhilaration of it and the terror of what could be down there that I don't know, and that psyching yourself out sort of thing. And Subnautica does exclusively terror but not horror. There's nothing horrific about what you see. There's no bodies.
No, that's true.
You don't. The only blood that you see is from the fish when you run them over.
And it's just like a little yellow splotch. Yeah.
And when you die, there's
deal.
There's nothing cinematic about it.
Nope.
Yep.
It's all about the terror and psyching yourself out. And I think that's where Subnautica really becomes the game that does this.
Yeah. I totally agree. And it's a game that isn't trying to be terrifying.
No.
I mean,
it's all
it
bright
kind of
colors.
is, but it isn't. Yeah, it's beautiful, bright colors. It's really pretty, super artistic.
And then loud objects and then distance.
Yes. The terror is something that happens organically instead of it being like, like jump scares and stuff like that. It's like you're scared because you feel like you're swimming around in a giant ocean with lots of things that can kill you. And you're terrified in the same way that you would actually be terrified swimming around in the ocean and seeing a shark.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Subnautica is so effective. That's why we want to talk about the lore of the game, because it's so effective at the terror part of it. Sorry, that was just something that I really wanted to say about it, because that's what makes this game so effective.
Yeah.
It is so effective with that. Absolutely. Yeah, I strongly think if anybody has any interest in games, this is one of those games that I feel like we should just be recommending to everyone. Because I'm like, look, if you like playing video games,
this is a game worth playing.
This is like, this is a memorable game. This is something that you will not forget easily.
It transcends somewhere between game and experience.
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah, I would agree. I really would like to try it in VR, because I feel like that would just take it to a whole other level.
Yes, it probably would.
It would be so amazing, but I get so seasick. It would be, it would not be a good experience, but...
Be like, I love this, but I'm gonna go vomit.
Yeah, it's like, this is amazing, but I just...
Yeah, that would be problematic. But
You'd have to put on the headset, look around for a while, be like, ooh, and then take it off.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, it's like, yep, this looks just about as good as I thought it would. All right, I'm done.
Back to the bathroom.
Yep. I got a good 2 minutes of it before I felt sick.
Yep, absolutely. But yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I have a whole bunch I want to talk about, but I'm going to keep that separate for the lore video. Or lore podcast. Sorry.
I have
Let me
more I'd
rephrase
love to
that.
talk about, but...
Do you have something you want to add to this one? Because we're clearly going to revisit this.
Yeah. Impressions-wise, I think I hit the points that I love, which is the thrill of the unknown, the movement, and honestly, even the bugs that I ran into were somewhat charming.
Yeah, they are. That's true. Yeah. They're not game-breaking. They're kind of funny and cute.
They're just kind of quirky. It's fine.
Yeah. It's a very well-polished game for what it did on such a small budget. Because they really did only have, before they released to early release, they only had like 6 months of time. And then when they went into early release, they only had an extra couple months to really get people interested in it. So what they did with going early alpha and getting enough critical mass to make it and survive out of early alpha is hugely impressive. Like, this is an unqualified recommend game for me.
I would agree. And here's another thing that I'll say. This game is the best example I have ever encountered of why indie games are, in many cases, better. The graphics in this game are very pretty, but they're not technically complicated.
No.
It's you could have made this game 10 years ago plus.
You could have made it in Unity. Wait.
Right. The graphics are gorgeous without being like really powerful, requiring a monster machine to play, that kind of thing. And the gameplay is reasonably simple with an asterisk. It's like none of this stuff that's in this game is novel. What's novel is how it's all put together.
I will put a qualified yes on that, mostly because the different fabricators that you can eventually get access to is not obvious in any way, shape, or form. Like, it took me a good 2 hours to realize that this moon pool that I added to my base was actually, it had its own fabricator built into the wall. Like, that was just invisible to me. So I was like, how do I do this? Which isn't unique to, like, anything or any of these survival crafting games. It was just one of those really glaring friction points that once I got that, I was like, oh, okay, these other rooms will have their own fabricators. Now I got it. Just a little signposting there would have been a lot better. I
think it's also kind of thematically appropriate that the game doesn't explain a lot. But again, the way it explains it to you, I think at one point the game tells you that you're like a low level, like not a janitor, but you're like a basic mechanic or something like that for the ship
of some sort.
Yeah, you're a nobody. You don't know how any of this stuff works. You just found yourself stranded on a planet and you got to figure it out. So it's thematically appropriate. It takes months
of training to learn to drive a prawn. What do you think?
In fact, it makes fun of you for this. Yeah, it regularly says, to be a proper helmsman of the Cyclops, you have to have like proper training and all of this stuff, and
it takes
it's supposed to be ran by 3 people.
Yeah.
So you're screwed, basically, is what it's trying to tell you. And so I feel like that's appropriate. And if you don't like the whole like struggling to figure out how things work, which is totally fair, Google's fine. It'll help.
Yeah.
Granted, I mean, if that's the worst I have for this game, that's a pretty soft.
That's a very agreed
complaint.
Yeah.
Yep. But I mean, I feel like a lot of the AAA title creators need to play Subnautica to remember what makes video games so compelling, because so much of them now are just cookie cutter, copy paste copies of other games that have already been out. And this is the first time that I've gone into a video game and come out of it being like, that was a novel experience. that was unlike anything else I've ever played. That was totally compelling. That's not something you encounter very often anymore. So, I don't know. I cannot... Obviously, I liked the game. My overall impressions? A++++.
Fair. Absolutely fair.
I love this game. It's one of my favorite games ever. It's just...
Yes.
It just does so much, and it's beautiful, and I like the ocean, and it's oceany, and it does that well, and...
Yep.
It's just the discovery, just even though I've played it a couple times now, it's like even this time through, even though I'd already played it and knew where I was going, like it was still like a joy and like really like kind of, you know, just awing how when you come to a new biome or even surprising like the freaking mushroom forest, which in my first playthrough apparently I only ever went to when it was dark, so I thought it was a dark scary place, and then in this playthrough I went, wait, light reaches the bottom here? What?
Yeah, the game does not hold your hand, and that's definitely one of those cases.
Doesn't. Yeah, so it's just really great, and the story, I mean, I was surprised that the story was, quite as deep and touching as it is. I mean, it's fairly simple, like, there's not a whole lot to it, like, you know, what you might expect in, like, an RPG or something, but it's very there, it's very present, it holds itself up, and it does help guide you through, if you're playing in story mode, like, you know, doing things, and where do you need to go, and what do you need to do, and, you know, it kind of, you know, closes off in a really, like, feely way, which, for me, I mean, if you punch me in the feels, you know, you gain points.
Yeah.
So if the game makes me cry, you have gained a lot of points because I'm having a lot of feelings and they're all coming out of my face. So well done.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm leaking feelings.
That's fair.
I'm leaking.
I agree. And actually, the other thing that is interesting about the storyline on this is, you're right, it isn't a super involved story. But, again, this is the first time I've ever experienced a sandbox-style game that does a story and does it right. In the regard that the story sort of organically evolves as you play the game. It doesn't feel like you're being pushed down a channel. It just genuinely feels like you're a survivor, and you're getting information as it becomes available, and you're putting the pieces together yourself.
Yeah.
The story doesn't tell itself. It just kind of... here's a thing, and then you kind of have to go, oh.
It's like a mystery. It's like, you know, you're like, oh, wait, what does this mean? Well, oh, I found this new piece of information. Well, what does that mean? Like, where does that leave me? This thing is talking to me telepathically. What? I guess I better figure out what that is unless I'm going crazy or something.
And it makes you a part of the story. Your character never talks at any point in the entire game. You are the character, and it does a great job of that. You're not like, I feel like I'm just guiding this other person around. It's like, no, this is me. I'm experiencing this.
Yeah, and if you're not paying attention, you won't know that your character has a mohawk until you see it in your shadow.
Oh, yeah. Holy crap.
Yeah, like, I saw that. I was like, wait, I have a mohawk? I mean, my character has a mohawk?
Which tells you it's doing its job.
Yeah, and it's very good at that. It does environmental storytelling better than Bethesda. Which is high praise from me.
Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, it does. That's a kind of profound thought, but you're totally right. Absolutely. It does a better job.
Yeah, because it shows and doesn't tell.
Yep.
So.
And your big climactic story moment where you meet the Sea Emperor, you don't need to have dialogue there. You just have to listen to her.
Yep.
And the way that plays out is perfect. Like, the silent protagonist really works there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yep.
We should probably cut this way long episode off a little bit. So we can save some more of the juicy bits for lore talk.
Oh yes. Oh, the juicy bits.
Yeah. So, this has been The Adventure Mechanics. I'm Chandler.
I'm Devin.
And I'm Tom.
And we will talk to you later.
Bye. Don't drown.
Yeah. Don't forget to eat.
Or that. Or drink. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate.